That's a residential area. Our correspondent says civilians are trapped there. And the plan is to move from there to the conference hall, where Gaddafi had previously hosted visiting heads of state. Another strategically important location is the military storage facility, which sits on the other side of town. And like many other cities, Gaddafi also has a personal compound in Sirte. Well, NTC fighters are having more trouble pushing into Sirte from the eastern side. Our correspondent Sue Turton travelled with the fighters as they came under heavy attack from Gaddafi's troops.
Slow progress on the eastern front of Sirte. Artillery rounds from Gaddafi's forces, holed up inside the city centre, are stretching the fighters' front line across 20 kilometres. We're about 4 kilometres inside now of the eastern gate, but the fighters' positions are still taking Grad rocket attacks. Even here, some of the forward bases are 20 kilometres from here, but these guys are still having to pick their way on foot to try and work out where the pockets of Gaddafi resistance are still holding out. We get to the top of the sand dunes as another assault is aimed at our position. The rocket can be heard spinning above us. The fighters think Gaddafi's spotters are now targeting this hill, so we make a run for it. Pulling right back because we've just had a rocket attack now over our heads. These fighters have a long way to go before they push right into Sirte. Okay.
We are working with our fighters inside the borders of Sirte, who are telling us they are in control of some part.
The fighters move their heavy artillery forward. More brutal firepower is now needed if they are to silence Gaddafi's guns. A letter signed by the military council is passed around, giving 5 religious reasons why prisoners must be respected and well treated. The council fears fighters will take revenge against the citizens of Gaddafi's hometown. Back at the East Gate, the fighters call for the arches to be demolished. Tanks are moved into position. Local people hated this gate. It acted as a border post for the regime. Only those with the right paperwork were allowed to enter. The medics persuade against it. They've enough casualties to treat without injuries from falling masonry.
OK, we can now go straight to Sue, who's been travelling with the fighters. Sue, can you give us an idea of what the progress has been like on the eastern side?
Progress, as I was saying in that report, has actually been quite slow. As day is turning to night, you can probably see it's really dusk now. And even now I can hear NATO jets overhead. And we're constantly hearing still the heavy thud of Grad attacks, rocket attacks, heavy artillery still hitting Libyan fighter positions further down this road. This is the eastern gate we were showing to you earlier. And pretty much the battle is from this eastern gate all the way down this road into Sirte. And I think they did expect to get further than they've got today. They have managed to push as much as 20 kilometres in, but that really is kind of forays into the city centre. One of the main areas of battle has been one of the military airports, which is this side of the city, but they still haven't secured that. Very much still the battle is on for the eastern side of Sirte. The eastern side of Sirte, the fighters here are basically saying they believe that most of Gaddafi's firepower is being pushed this way to try and stop their advances.
It's rather unexpected or rather curious that it's taken this long, especially if they've got NATO firepower backing them. Do they know what they are encountering? Do they know how many fighters that they will be up against and what kind of firepower they have?
No, I don't think they do. I mean, they are telling me that, but they are managing to get satellite phone calls through to the sympathetic people inside of Sirte, what they would call their rebel uprising going on in Sirte. And they say that they believe there are a lot of fighters inside of Sirte that are trying to rise up at the same time as the advances are happening from both the east, the west, and we know the south. But they don't really know the extent of what Gaddafi has in there. They are obviously still taking on a lot of heavy artillery to their positions. They haven't actually had a lot of casualties this side. We heard of at least 1 fatality and a number of ambulances have come past with some injuries. But it hasn't been a steady stream today at all. But what is happening is the amount of artillery that Gaddafi has is managing to keep them out of the city centre. They are still being kept quite a long way from the city centre and they're not managing to push forwards. And they are very much hoping that, as I say, the NATO jets I can still hear overhead right now, they are very much hoping that they can pick out where those key areas are. But the sort of repetition of concern is always they believe there are a lot of families still inside of Sirte, and they are worried if they start shelling two areas in the middle, then they're going to start killing civilians. So they're hoping that NATO has better intelligence and can start picking out some of the bigger problems that Gaddafi is still causing them.
Sue Turton live for us in eastern Sirte, where there is a push.
Fighters are unable to push any further to reach that residential area 1 because they're facing stiff resistance. So Gaddafi's men really are putting up a fight. There's a lot of resistance here. They're using heavy firepower. They're using rockets. They're using mortars, and they're using snipers, which really makes it very difficult for the anti-Gaddafi fighters to advance because they just don't know where they are. They're inexperienced fighters, and they say that it's very difficult for us really to know these sources of fire. So snipers, heavy firepower, but anti-Gaddafi fighters are also using heavy firepower, as you just heard. That's tank shells are being fired on what they believe are Gaddafi positions inside Sirte. So this is an ongoing battle. Yes, they're inside Sirte. They managed to advance a few kilometers with relative ease, but right now they're ongoing battles.
We have been here before, Zaina. I mean, they've made attempts on Sirte before and faced exactly the same kind of problems that you have just outlined. Is their strategy this time any different? And specifically, I mean, looking at that tank just lobbing shells behind you, what are they doing to ensure that those shells are not landing on civilians who are not with the Gaddafi forces?
Well, exactly. Like you mentioned, the offensive against Sirte started approximately 10 days ago, but nothing like this. We are talking about hundreds of fighters taking part in this assault. In the past few days, a few dozen fighters will enter the city only to help evacuate families. This time it is an all-out assault. There is a decision to take control of this coastal city. And like you mentioned, there's no way for them to know where those missiles and those rockets or tank shells are actually landing, but they do know that civilians are trapped in certain neighborhoods, like residential area 1, and the civilians there really are not from Sirte. They are people from Misrata, people who want to leave but are unable to because they don't have cars, they don't have fuel, and this is what commanders here have told us. They're trapped inside, they don't have basic supplies. This is a very difficult fight, but this is the final push. Now, like you also mentioned earlier, before we've seen, fighters enter only to retreat a few hours later. We saw for ourselves, them taking in containers. They're setting up defensive positions. So this time they're planning to hold the territory that they gained. It hasn't been much, but they managed to reach the city center.
All right, Zaina, for the moment, thank you. We'll rejoin you later on. Zaina Khodr, just on the outskirts of Sirte, where there is, as you can see, live pictures of the offensive underway.
Our correspondent Alistair Leithhead said that despite some opposition, the anti-Gaddafi fighters are making significant advances.
Well, there certainly is some resistance. The question is how many troops are involved and how much now lies between the big army that's gathered this side on the east and the 30 to 35 kilometers that's now left before they reach the city centre of Sirte itself. They've made some big gains today, 15 to 20 kilometres probably, which is more than they've moved in the last few days, certainly. They were stuck here 24 or 36 hours ago. This was very much a front line. The gate that you talked about is just ahead of me. They've gone through that and beyond. We went up to those positions right up on the front line a few hours ago, and there was some pretty intense fire there, most of it going out from the NTC forces, but certainly some rockets coming back onto their positions from the pro-Gaddafi lines as well.
And has this advance been supported by any NATO airstrikes?
There have been NATO planes buzzing overhead, but we haven't heard the very characteristic sound of bombs being dropped on those positions. I get the sense that there are small scattered groups of pro-Gaddafi units, some of them with rockets, some of them with heavier weapons, who are left in this long flat plain from here right through to Sirte. I can hear the rumble of field guns in the background and rockets being fired, but they're getting further and further away. I think there is that sense of it moving all the time now towards Sirte. But is there a big defensive line that's been set up from the pro-Gaddafi forces that is going to prevent and delay this army from moving any further, any more quickly? We don't know that yet. We do know that hundreds of civilians have been seen coming out of Sirte in various directions, who told some journalists that they'd been told they had to stay, but they fled anyway. And from those reports in the West, it does appear that they are making a push for Sirte. It just depends how much resistance there is from within the city itself, whether there's going to be house-to-house fighting, or whether Sirte will fall quickly.
And from those civilians who've left, or from indeed any other sources, have you heard what conditions are like inside Sirte for those civilians who have been still living there?
We haven't this side. There have been a very few number of people coming out from Sirte. We know that they've been pretty much cut off. It's a big city, though, a big city which has a lot of supplies anyway, as any big city does. But certainly, as time has gone on, those conditions will be getting worse. When there's fighting, of course, that makes things very difficult for people to get around and get to supplies. We did hear from one of the commanders here. Again, of course, there's a lot of propaganda, but he said he was from Sirte and that he got the sense that a lot of people in Sirte hadn't even realised that Tripoli had fallen because communications have been down, electricity down, and propaganda. He said that people were being told that the rebels would come in and they would kill people, they would take them prisoners. The prisoners that we've seen here have been treated well. So again, there's sort of propaganda from both sides, but very much from this side of things, the momentum is building again, and as I say, they've taken a long distance towards Sirte again today.
Alistair Leithhead speaking